My neighbor keeps letting her dog use my front yard as a bathroom. When I finally said something, she called the HOA on my fence instead. I want to start by saying I am not a person who escalates things. Ask anyone who knows me. I let things go. I give people the benefit of the doubt. I am the woman at work who eats the wrong lunch order without complaining because making a fuss feels worse than the inconvenience. But 6 months of finding the same spot on my front lawn ruined. 6 months of being polite about it, and one retaliatory call to the HOA over a fence that has been standing exactly the same way for 4 years has taught me that there is a version of me who does not let things go. I met her this spring. Her name is also Lauren, which feels like an unrelated detail except that it is the first thing my neighbor and I ever had in common, and possibly now the only thing. My name is Lauren, and I live in a quiet subdivision outside Charlotte, the kind of neighborhood where the houses all have slightly different siding colors but the same basic floor plan, where the HOA sends out a newsletter every month about acceptable mailbox styles, and where I have lived for 6 years with my husband Tom and our 2 kids, Ben who is 11 and Grace who is 8. I want to tell you about my front yard before I tell you about my neighbor, because the yard matters to this story in a way that might seem excessive until you understand what 6 years of work went into it. When we bought the house, the front yard was basically dirt with patches of crabgrass that the previous owners had clearly given up on. I am not a landscaper by profession. I work part-time doing the books for a dental practice, but I have spent 6 years of weekends and evenings turning that yard into something I am genuinely proud of. A small flower bed along the walkway that I redo every spring, grass that I have fought for, literally fought for, against grubs and drought, and one particularly bad year of fungus that required 3 different treatments. It is not a magazine yard, but it is mine, and it represents a specific kind of effort that I think anyone who has ever cared about a piece of land they own will understand. My neighbor, also named Lauren. I am going to call her Lauren K to avoid confusion, since that is genuinely her name too, which has been a source of mild comedy in the neighborhood for the 2 years she has lived there, moved in directly across the street from us. She has a golden retriever named Biscuit who is, I want to be fair, a genuinely sweet dog. None of this is about the dog's temperament. This is about a habit that developed gradually and that I let go on far longer than I should have. It started small, the way these things do. I noticed maybe 8 months ago that there was a particular spot near my mailbox where the grass kept getting a brownish dying patch no matter what I did. I treated it. I reseeded it. I assumed it was some kind of soil issue, maybe a buried rock affecting drainage, something structural that I needed to dig into. Eventually, it was not a soil issue. I found out what it actually was on a Tuesday morning in October when I happened to be getting the mail at the same time Lauren K was walking. Biscuit passed my house, and Biscuit, without any hesitation or redirection from her, walked directly onto my lawn near the mailbox and did exactly what dogs do, while Lauren K stood there scrolling on her phone, waiting, the way you wait for a dog to finish without really paying attention to where the dog is doing it. I stood at my mailbox with a stack of catalogs in my hand and watched this happen and felt a very specific kind of clarity wash over me. 8 months of a dying patch of grass. 8 months of reseeding and wondering what was wrong with my soil. It was not my soil. It was Biscuit. Multiple times a week, in the exact same spot, because dogs are creatures of habit, and apparently so are the people walking them. I did not say anything that morning. I want to be honest about why. It felt awkward to bring up in the moment standing there with my mail, and some part of me genuinely thought maybe this was a one-time thing I had just happened to witness. Even though the dying grass told a different story, I had simply refused to read correctly until that exact second. I watched for it after that. I am not proud of how long I watched instead of saying something, but I wanted to be sure before I brought it up, because Lauren K and I had always been friendly in the casual way neighbors are friendly. Waves from the driveway, a few conversations at the mailbox, an invitation to her daughter's birthday party 2 summers ago that we had actually gone to. I did not want to make something small into something that damaged that. Over the next 3 weeks, I confirmed what I already knew. It was not occasional. It was close to every walk, several times a week, always near my mailbox. Always while she was on her phone or talking to whoever she was walking with. Never once picked up after. Never once redirected. I started keeping track. The way I am apparently a person who keeps track of things once I decide they matter. Not in an obsessive way, just mentally noting it, building up the case in my head before I said anything, because some part of me wanted to be fair and make sure this was actually the pattern I thought it was, and not me overreacting to something that happened twice and felt like more. By the time I decided to say something, it was late November. and the dead patch by my mailbox had spread to nearly the size of a beach towel, brown and bare against the green grass around it that I had worked so hard to maintain. I want to tell you that I planned what I was going to say. I did, actually. I am the kind of person who rehearses difficult conversations in the shower, and I had rehearsed this one several times, landing on something I thought was reasonable, friendly even, designed to give her an easy way to just fix it without anyone feeling attacked. I caught her on a Saturday morning. She was getting the mail at the same time I was out front doing some early winter cleanup in the flower bed, Biscuit on his leash beside her, sniffing around the base of her own mailbox post the way dogs do. "Hey, do you have a second?" I said, standing up, brushing dirt off my knees. "Sure, what's up?" she said, and she seemed genuinely friendly. No defensiveness yet, no idea what was coming. "I think Biscuit's been using the same spot on my lawn pretty regularly," I said, keeping my tone as light as I could manage. "Right by my mailbox. There's actually a dead patch there now from it. Would you mind redirecting him somewhere else when you guys walk by? I've been trying to fix that spot for months, and I just figured out what was actually causing it." She looked at me for a moment, and something in her expression shifted in a way I did not expect. Not embarrassment, which is what I had braced for. Something closer to defensiveness, arriving faster than I thought the situation warranted. "He's a dog," she said. "That's kind of what dogs do, Lauren." "I get that," I said, still trying to keep it light. "I'm not asking you to stop walking him past the house, just maybe steer him a few feet over so it's not always the exact same spot. It's killing the grass." "It's grass," she said. "It grows back." "It hasn't been growing back," I said. "That's actually why I'm bringing it up. I've reseeded it 3 times. She was quiet for a second, Biscuit pulling slightly at the leash, eager to keep moving. "I'll try to keep an eye on it," she said, in a tone that did not entirely match the words, and then she gave a small wave and continued down the sidewalk with Biscuit. And I stood there in my own yard feeling like the conversation had gone sideways somewhere in the middle, without my fully understanding how. I want to tell you what happened over the following 2 weeks, because it is the part that took this from a minor neighborhood annoyance into something that genuinely surprised me. Nothing changed. If anything, I noticed Biscuit using that same spot with what felt like exactly the same frequency, though I will admit I cannot prove intent on a dog's part, and I am not trying to suggest the dog was being deliberately spiteful. What I can tell you is that Lauren Kay's body language toward me shifted noticeably. The friendly waves stopped. When I saw her at the mailbox after that conversation, she was on her phone, clearly using it as a reason not to make eye contact, in a way that felt different from her normal phone habits. I told myself I was reading too much into it. I told Tom about the conversation that night, and he said reasonably, "Maybe just give her some time. People don't love being told their dog is a problem." Even nicely. I gave her time. 3 weeks, actually, during which the dead patch did not improve, and Lauren Kay's friendliness did not return. Then, on a Thursday afternoon in early December, I got an email from our HOA management company with a subject line that made my stomach drop before I even opened it. Notice of violation. Fence compliance. Want to tell you what I did the morning after that email arrived, because I think it says something about how I handle being provoked, which is apparently slowly and then all at once. I did not respond to the HOA right away. I sat with the email overnight, reread it twice more at the kitchen table with my coffee, and let myself feel exactly as annoyed as I needed to feel before I tried to think clearly about it. Tom came downstairs while I was on my second read-through and looked over my shoulder. 4 inches, he said. "That's it? That's the violation." "That's the violation," I said. "That fence has been like that since we moved in." "I know." He sat down across from me with his own coffee. "You think it's her?" "I don't think it. I know it." I set my phone down. 17 days, Tom. 17 days after I asked her to redirect the dog, someone files an anonymous complaint about a fence that's been standing exactly the same way for 6 years. Nobody else in this neighborhood has ever once mentioned our fence. He didn't argue with the logic, because there wasn't much to argue with. What he did say, in the careful tone he uses when he's trying to keep me from doing something rash before I've had enough coffee, was, "Okay, but you don't actually know it's her. And even if it is, getting into a tit-for-tat thing with a neighbor over a fence and a dog is going to make every day around here worse, not better." He had a point. And I knew he had a point, and it did not change how I felt. I called the HOA management company that afternoon, mostly to understand what I was actually dealing with before I decided what to do about it. The woman who answered, a clearly overworked person named Diane who manages probably a dozen subdivisions worth of these complaints, explained that the rule was real, 6 feet maximum for backyard privacy fences in our community, and ours, after an actual measurement by the inspector they'd sent out, was 6'4". Was this fence ever an issue before? I asked. "Not that's in our system," Diane said. "Sometimes these things just don't get caught until someone reports them, or until someone has a specific reason to look for something to report," I said, and I heard her pause slightly on the other end. The particular pause of someone who has heard this exact suspicion from 100 other homeowners, and is not allowed to confirm or deny anything about it. I can't speak to who filed it or why, she said. Complaints are anonymous per our policy. What I can tell you is you have 30 days to bring the fence into compliance, or there's a fine schedule that starts after that. I asked what the fine schedule looked like. It started at $50 a month and escalated from there, which was not going to bankrupt us, but was also not nothing. And more than that, it was the principle of being fined $50 a month for a fence that had stood unremarked upon for 6 years until I had the audacity to ask someone to stop letting their dog ruin my lawn. I hung up with Diane and sat with the information for a while. Here's what I did next. And I want to be honest that I am not entirely proud of how petty the impulse felt, even though I do think it was a reasonable response. I went outside with my own measuring tape and measured Lauren Kay's fence. I want to clarify, her backyard fence, visible from the side of her property where it bordered the sidewalk, was not hidden or anything I needed to trespass to see. I simply walked down to where the fence met the public sidewalk, the same way the original HOA inspector presumably had with ours, and measured it. It was 6'2", also over the limit. Not by as much as ours, but over. I stood there with my measuring tape for a long minute, feeling a complicated mix of things. Vindication, mostly, but also a kind of weary recognition that I was now the kind of person who measured a neighbor's fence with a tape measure on a Thursday afternoon, which was not a version of myself I had previously known existed. I did not file a complaint. I want to be clear about that because I think it would have been easy to escalate this into exactly the kind of tit-for-tat war Tom had warned me about. And some instinct in me, even in that moment, knew that going that route would not actually get me anything I wanted. What I wanted was for the dog thing to stop, and for the fence complaint against me to be understood for what it actually was. So instead, I took photos. The measurement on my own fence with the inspector's official report I'd received. The measurement on hers, dated, time-stamped on my phone. I did not send anything to the HOA. I put it in a folder and didn't decide yet what, if anything, I'd do with it. I want to tell you about the conversation I had with my friend Priya that weekend, because she's the person I run things by when I'm not sure if I'm seeing a situation clearly or just being stubborn. We sat on my back porch, behind the now controversial fence, drinking coffee while the kids played in the yard, and I told her the whole thing from the beginning. The dog, the dead grass, the conversation that went sideways, the complaint 17 days later. You measured her fence, Priya said, somewhere between impressed and concerned. I measured her fence, and it's also too tall. Also too tall. She was quiet for a second, turning her coffee cup in her hands. Okay, so what do you actually want here? Like, if you could get any outcome, what is it? I thought about it longer than I expected to. I want the dog thing to stop, I said. That's actually it. I don't want a war with her. I don't even necessarily want to get her in trouble for her fence, even though some petty part of me would enjoy that for about 10 minutes. I just want my lawn to stop getting ruined, and I want this to not have become a whole standoff over something that started as me asking nicely for a small thing. So tell her that, Priya said. Not the HOA. Her. I tried telling her. You tried telling her about the dog. You haven't told her you know about the fence thing, or that you think it's connected. She shrugged. Maybe she doesn't even know her own fence is out of compliance. Maybe this isn't as calculated as it feels right now. People do petty things when they feel attacked, even when the petty thing doesn't fully make sense. I sat with that for a while after she left. It was a more generous read of the situation than I had been giving Lauren Kay, and I did not love how reasonable it sounded. I decided to write her a note instead of catching her at the mailbox again, partly because the mailbox conversations had not gone well, and partly because I wanted to say something complete and thought through rather than something reactive that I'd regret the phrasing of later. I kept it short. I told her I'd gotten the HOA notice about our fence, that I assumed she knew something about it given the timing, and that I wasn't interested in escalating things between us. I told her again, plainly, that the dog thing was the actual issue for me, that I genuinely liked her and had appreciated being neighbors these past 2 years, and that I would rather just talk through both things honestly than have this turn into something neither of us wanted. I put it in her mailbox on a Sunday evening. I did not hear back Monday, or Tuesday, Wednesday afternoon. I was in the kitchen when I saw her car pull into her driveway, and a few minutes later my doorbell rang. I closed the door slowly behind her, my hand still on the handle for a second longer than necessary, processing what she'd just said. There's something else going on. I gestured toward the couch, and she sat down at the edge of it, my note still folded in her hand, like she wasn't entirely sure if she should set it down or keep holding on to it. Can I get you something? Water, coffee? I asked, because it felt strange to just launch into a serious conversation standing in my own entryway, and some part of me needed a minute to recalibrate what I'd expected this conversation to be versus what it apparently was about to become. Water's fine, she said. I got us both glasses and sat down across from her in the armchair. And for a second, neither of us said anything. Outside, I could hear Ben and Grace in the backyard, their voices carrying faintly through the window. The ordinary sound of an ordinary Wednesday afternoon happening around whatever this conversation was about to be. I want to start by saying I'm sorry, she said. Not just for the fence thing, for the dog thing too. I knew what I was doing when I let him keep going back to that spot after you asked me. I told myself it wasn't a big deal. That grass grows back, all the things I said to you. But I knew. Okay, I said, because I wasn't sure yet where this was going and didn't want to fill the space with the wrong reaction. The fence complaint, she said, and she looked down at the note in her hands. That wasn't really about you either. I mean, it was in the sense that I'm the one who filed it, and I knew it would create a problem for you, and I did it anyway, which is its own thing I have to own. But the actual reason I was looking that closely at HOA rules in the first place has nothing to do with your fence. What's going on? I asked. She was quiet for a moment, turning her water glass slightly on her knee. My husband and I are getting divorced, she said. It's not public yet, not really. We're still figuring out logistics, but it's happening. And the house is in his name from before we got married, and there's been a whole conversation with his lawyer about whether I have to move out and what counts as marital property. And at some point in the middle of all that, I started reading through every single HOA document I could find, because I guess some part of me felt like if I understood every rule in this neighborhood backward and forward, I'd have some kind of control over something when everything else felt like it was being decided around me instead of by me. I sat with that for a second. It was not what I had expected to hear. And somewhere in reading through all of it, she continued, I noticed your fence height in some old listing photo from when you guys bought the house, just out of habit at that point. Like I was looking at everything that closely. And then you came over and talked to me about Biscuit, and I was already feeling like everything in my life was falling apart and out of my control. And some petty, ugly part of me thought, well, here's one thing I actually can do something about. I can report this. She looked up at me. It wasn't really about you, Lauren. I'm sorry it landed on you anyway. I want to tell you that my first reaction was simple compassion. Full stop. No complications. It wasn't, entirely, part of me. And I think this is honest. Even if it's not the most generous version of myself, was still annoyed about 6 months of my lawn being ruined and 3 weeks of being given the cold shoulder for asking about it nicely. Knowing why someone does something does not automatically erase the something, but it did change the shape of how I felt about it. I'm sorry you're going through that, I said. And I meant it, even with the other feelings still sitting underneath it. That sounds really hard. It is, she said. I haven't told most people yet. You're actually one of the first people outside my immediate family who knows, which is a weird thing to realize I'm telling you, given the circumstances. How long has it been going on? I asked. The divorce stuff, I mean. About 4 months, she said. Right around when you first noticed the spot on your lawn, actually. If I'm being honest about the timeline, I think I started walking Biscuit longer and later and paying less attention to where exactly we were, because I was using the walks to just get out of the house and not think, and I genuinely wasn't tracking where he was going half the time. I thought about that for a moment. The dead patch by my mailbox starting roughly the same time her marriage started falling apart. 2 completely separate problems that had nothing to do with each other, except that they happened to occupy the same several months and the same dog on the same leash. I should have just told you that back in November, she said, instead of getting defensive about it. I think I heard you say something was wrong, and some part of me that was already feeling like a failure at managing my own life heard it as one more thing I was screwing up, and I reacted to that instead of to what you were actually asking, which was a completely reasonable thing. We talked for a while longer, about the divorce in general terms, about how the kids were handling it. She has a 10-year-old, a boy named Eli who's in the same grade as my Ben, though different classes, and about how isolating the past few months had been for her in a neighborhood where everyone still saw her as half of a couple that wasn't actually a couple anymore behind closed doors. I'll call the HOA tomorrow and withdraw the complaint, she said. I don't know if that's actually possible once it's filed, but I'll try. And I'll fix the dog thing for real this time. I'll keep him on a shorter leash near your house. Redirect him before he even gets close to that spot. I appreciate that, I said. Both things. She stood up to leave, and at the door she paused. For what it's worth, she said, I know this doesn't undo 6 months of you reseeding the same patch of grass. I'm going to look into getting that fixed too, actually paying for it. Not just apologizing for it. I think I owe you that. I told her that wasn't necessary, though some part of me, the same part that had measured her fence with a tape measure on a Thursday, thought it was a genuinely fair offer and didn't fully mind that she'd made it. I called the HOA management company the next afternoon, mostly out of curiosity about whether Lauren Kay had actually followed through on withdrawing the complaint, and Diane confirmed that the complaint had been withdrawn that morning, but explained somewhat awkwardly that the inspection itself had already happened and the violation was technically technically on record regardless of who had filed the original complaint, so we still have to fix the fence, I said to Tom that evening, relaying the conversation. Even though the complaint's gone, apparently once they've measured it and confirmed it's out of compliance, that part doesn't go away just because the person who reported it changed their mind. Tom rubbed his face the way he does when he's tired of a problem that keeps generating smaller problems. So we're paying to fix a fence because of a complaint that was never really about the fence in the first place. Pretty much, I said. I want to be honest that there was a part of me that found this mildly infuriating in a way that had nothing to do with Lauren K's divorce or her honesty about the situation. Sometimes a thing is annoying on its own bureaucratic merits regardless of the human story behind it. But it was a different kind of annoyed than I'd felt sitting at my kitchen table with that first email. This was the ordinary annoyance of dealing with an HOA. Not the simmering, personal annoyance of feeling targeted by someone I thought I'd been reasonable with. Over the following weeks, things between Lauren K and me settled into something different than what we'd had before, and different from the standoff we'd briefly had too. She kept Biscuit on a noticeably shorter leash whenever they passed our house, steering him well clear of the mailbox and the dead patch. With some receding and what felt like actual effort on both our parts, she dropped off a bag of grass seed on our porch one afternoon without much comment, which I understood as its own kind of apology. Slowly started to fill back in. We didn't become close friends exactly. Not in those first few weeks. There was still something a little careful between us, the residue of having been genuinely frustrated with each other, even after understanding why. But the waves came back. The mailbox conversations got easier. And once, in February, when I saw her sitting alone on her front steps on an unseasonably warm afternoon while Eli was at a friend's house, I walked over and sat down next to her for 20 minutes. And we talked about nothing in particular, the kind of nothing that matters more than people give it credit for. I want to tell you about that conversation on Lauren K's porch in August, because it's the part of this whole thing that I think about more than the dog. More than the fence, more than any of the actual logistics that started all of it. We were sitting on her front steps again, the same spot where I'd found her alone back in February. Except this time it was a planned visit. She'd texted me that morning asking if I wanted to come over once the kids were settled with homework. And I'd walked across the street with a bag of cherry tomatoes from my own garden, because it felt like the kind of small, ordinary gesture that fit where we'd landed with each other. Can I tell you something kind of strange? She said, after we'd talked through the usual catching up things. Eli's summer camp, my kids' upcoming school year, the heat. Sure, I said. That day I came to your door with your note. She said. That was the first time I'd told anyone the whole truth about what was going on. Not the edited version I gave my sister, not the careful version I gave my mom, not even the version I gave my own therapist, if I'm being honest, because even there I think I was managing how it sounded. She picked at a loose thread on her shorts. I told you, a neighbor I'd been in a weird standoff with over a dog and a fence. Things I'd never told the people who were supposed to be closest to me. Why do you think that was? I asked. She thought about it for a while. I think because with you, there was nothing left to protect. She said. I'd already done the thing. I'd already filed the complaint, already let things get petty and small between us. There was no version of that conversation where I came out looking good no matter what I said, so I just said the actual truth instead of the version that made me look okay. With my family, I think I'd been so focused on managing how bad it sounded that I never just said it plainly. You weren't invested in me looking fine. You just wanted to know why your fence had a complaint on it. I sat with that for a moment, turning a cherry tomato in my hand before I ate it. I think I understand that more than I expected to. I said. There's something almost easier about being honest with someone you don't have history with yet. Less to lose. Right, she said. And I think once I said it out loud to you, even under those weird circumstances, it got easier to say to everyone else after that. I told my sister the real version that same week. I told my therapist the parts I'd been smoothing over. It was like the fence thing accidentally cracked something open that I don't think I would have cracked open on my own. I want to be careful here not to make this sound like the conflict between us was secretly some kind of gift, because I don't think that's quite right either, and I don't want to flatten what was a genuinely frustrating 6 months into something neat and meaningful in hindsight, just because it happened to work out. The dead patch of grass by my mailbox was real. The 3 weeks of being iced out after a reasonable request were real. The stress of an HOA violation notice landing in my inbox because someone was taking out an unrelated crisis on my fence was real and inconvenient and cost us actual money to fix. But I also think something true happened in that conversation on my couch in March, something that wouldn't have happened if I'd handled things differently. If I'd just filed a counter complaint about her fence the way some petty part of me had wanted to, or if I'd let the whole thing fester into a silent neighborhood feud the way these things sometimes do, where two people stop speaking entirely and just quietly resent each other from across the street for years. I think about Priya's question a lot, the one she asked me on my back porch that weekend. What do you actually want here? I'd answered honestly. I wanted the dog thing to stop. I didn't actually want a war, and I think because I kept coming back to that honest, smaller goal instead of escalating towards something bigger and more satisfying in the short term, there was room left for an actual conversation to happen instead of just an actual fight. Here's what our lives look like now. Almost a year and a half after the whole thing started, Biscuit still walks past my house most days, on a leash that Lauren K keeps noticeably shorter as they pass my mailbox. And the grass there has fully recovered, thick and green now, no different from the rest of the lawn. Like none of it ever happened, except that I know exactly which patch it was and probably always will. Lauren K and I have become something closer to actual friends, not just friendly neighbors. We trade plants from our gardens. Our kids have started doing homework together some afternoons, Ben and Eli at my kitchen table while Grace does her own thing nearby. She comes over for coffee sometimes on weekend mornings, and I've gone over to hers, and somewhere in the last year, the relationship shifted from two people who happen to live across the street from each other into something that actually resembles friendship, built, strangely, on the foundation of a conflict that could have gone a much worse direction. The fence is 6 feet exactly now, code compliant, slightly shorter than it used to be, and I notice it sometimes when I'm out back and think, briefly, about the whole strange chain of events that led to a contractor standing in my backyard with a saw, fixing something that had never actually been a problem until it became a stand-in for something else entirely. I want to end this with something honest, rather than something tidy, because I think tidy endings can flatten what actually happened in ways that aren't quite true. I don't think every neighbor conflict resolves like this one did. I think if Lauren K had not been going through something that made her receptive to an honest conversation, if she'd just kept being defensive and I'd kept being frustrated, we could have easily ended up as two people who waved less and less at each other until the waving stopped entirely. The way these things sometimes just quietly calcify into permanent low-grade tension between people who live 40 feet apart and have to keep seeing each other anyway. What I think actually made the difference was that neither of us let the small thing become the only thing. I kept coming back to what I actually wanted, which was modest and specific, instead of what would have felt satisfying in the moment, which was escalating. And she eventually chose honesty over continuing to manage an image, even though it meant admitting something uncomfortable to someone she barely knew well enough to trust with it. I still think about that spring sometimes. The measuring tape, the email with its anonymous complaint, the note I wrote and almost didn't put in her mailbox because I worried it would make things worse instead of better. None of it felt small while it was happening. It felt, for a few weeks there, like the kind of thing that could genuinely sour a neighborhood relationship for years. Instead, it turned into cherry tomatoes on her porch steps in August, and a friendship that started, of all things, with a dog and a strip of dead grass by my mailbox, and somewhere underneath both of those things, two women who turned out to need exactly the kind of honest conversation neither of us had been planning to have.